Okay, so earlier today I did a drape for a bra cup. And so what I'm doing now is I'm going to pattern that drape. So I've basically just started out like I would anything when it comes to sort of irregular pattern pieces. I started with a center front line. That I can place my center front piece up against. And I also created a horizontal line that represent my waist. And then on this end, I have a center back line for the center back piece. Now I've spaced these things out with enough room in between that I can make corrections should I need to. So just make sure that you kind of give yourself that little bit of a leeway in case you need to change stuff around. I've also included the cup, and I've put them above where they would be kind of sort of on the the tracing. You can, if I had wide enough, tall enough paper, I could put the upper cup over that, and that's fine. Just next to each other's fine. This is all going to be cut apart because this is going to be turned into a working pattern. So as long as you just keep everything straight, you're good to go. Now, for this, you want to line up point to point the waist on that straight line. Then you want to trace exactly on your drape and make sure that you get everything traced out correctly. Okay. And don't forget to trace out any notches that you've marked on your drape. Now I've gone ahead and done all that to everything already, so I don't have to sit here doing all of that for whatever reason. So this piece has been traced. And for your benefit, I am going to draw this in with a light seafoam green marker. And I'm going to mark the notch in orange. Okay, and as if by magic, I have done that on all the pieces. Now, we need to also make sure that we label this. So this is going to be center front. And I always put a little arrow that indicates that is the direction towards the neckline. If you look over here, you see this little narrow piece, which is the back piece. This is very narrow, and the bottom of it looks just like the top of it. And upside down, it gets away from you very quickly. So what we need to do is make sure that we give ourselves some kind of indication that that is north. All right. The next thing we need to do is we need to make sure all of these pieces match as far as, well, the next thing we need to do is clean up any lines that we have. So this is one of the biggest issues that a lot of students have, is that they don't understand how to clean up and how to get smooth curves. You'll need your rulers. So you have your hip curve, which is this parenthesis looking thing. You have your variform curve, which is apostrophe comma. And you have this little chubby thing, which is it's an arm's eye curve for armholes. But I find that you find a lot of curves with this one. And this one and this one are pretty much the same curve-ish, except this one's deeper and it has more shape to it. So they're pretty much the exact same curve, though. You can also get one of these, which is French curve number 17. And this is really good for finding shapes because it is literally the exact same curve as the little chubby one. I find this one I mean, they're the same thing, but I think this one has more potential because I have this other side to work with, but they're the exact same thing. It doesn't matter. So looking at this, and I'm going to do all of my corrections in a different color. I'm going to do them in hot pink. Sorry, neon pink. That way you can see what my corrections look like. And then if we need to adjust anything for measurement, I'll do that in black. So let's just start here because we need to make sure that this seam goes to this seam, this seam, this seam, this seam to this seam, this seam to this seam, and this seam to this seam. And then, of course, we have to get the cup, this to this, and then together they have to fit into here. So it's a lot, but it's not that much. So the first thing I'm going to do is correct my curve. And if you put a ruler up against it, you can see if your curve is correct or not. And the ruler just gives you a straight edge to work on. You can use whatever shape ruler you can use to find the curve. Now, if you'll look here, if I put this up against here, it's a little too far away at the bottom. You can see that there's a big gap down here. Well, I can just adjust it and do it in 2 parts. That's no problem. But if you'll look at a different ruler, you'll find that from point to point, this is a smoother curve. So just find the ruler that works for you and works for your curve. So now the hot pink is my new corrected line. I don't care about measurement right now, but I have to have some sense of, I have to have something to come back to so I can do my measurements. Also with this, I know that I need a 90-degree angle right here. So what I'm going to do is from this point, I'm just going to draw a straight line over and clean that up. I also need one up here. So from this point, which is the curve, I am drawing a straight line all the way over. Why do we start from the curve and go to the straight line? Because we know this and this need to be 90-degree angles. And when we have, and that's what that little L looks, that little L shape represents. 90 degrees, 90 degrees. And when we do that, the curve, we haven't adjusted yet at all. So when we start to do this, we know this is going to have to be a 90-degree angle. So we might as well just go from the thing that we haven't done yet to the thing we know has to be done. So from that point, that's why we move over. Instead of starting from here and working over, we go from this point and over because we can still adjust all of this. Okay. Here, now, I use the curve this way on this, but you'll look, this is pretty much a straight line. So let's see if we can find it with a straight line. We can, but there is a slight curve to it, but it's not as significant as you would think. So I'm going to straight line that. Here is a slight curve. Find the curve on one of the rulers. If it's a slight curve, it's going to be the hip curve. If it's an obvious curve, it's going to be the variform. If it's a super obvious curve, it's probably going to be this. That's it. There's nothing else to it. So let's look at this. This curve. Now look at that. That covers more of the curve. Now I'm probably still going to have to do this in 2 parts. But as long as I clean it up, it's okay. Or 3 parts. And all I'm doing is just using the ruler to find that smooth curve. That's it. If you need to do it in 3 parts, do it in 3 parts. Here, I've got a curve. So I'm going to do the same thing. Smooth that up. Oh, we didn't do this over here. Over here, a more pronounced curve. really you're just using the rulers as a straight edge. You notice I'm not paying attention at all to the and change the ruler direction if you need to. See, that's perfect now. I'm not using the measurements at all because right now they don't matter. Look at this. It's pretty much a straight line, but I've got sort of a shape down here. So let's look at this. Flip the ruler back and forth, and don't be afraid to use the rulers. Okay, that seems better. So, right there. Now, this is special because it does this and then it comes out. So here you can see that it's sort of like relatively straight and then it comes back in. Now that's to compensate for this, and that's just the shape of the seam. So I'm going to use a ruler to find that shape. That's it. Will that work for that? I don't know. Let's go ahead and use this one. If you could only get 2 rulers, I'd probably get these 2 and but probably throw that in too. This one's going to be less. This is about $7. This is about $14, $15. So, or this might not even be $7. So this one's the same thing as this one. I would get this one if you could only afford one or the other. Okay. So looking at this shape, probably get it with this. Looking up, sliding the ruler down. And see, at this point, at least for me, it's just instinctual. Like I know where to move the ruler, but you know, over time, and that's what most of this is, it just comes out over time what you need to do. And unfortunately, there's no quick answer to it. It's just experience. But the more you do it, the more it will make sense. Looking at this. Down here. So that looks pretty good. Also, when you do this, make sure you're using pencil. Don't do it like I'm doing it with a chunky marker, because a chunky marker is going to give you a false reading. Now, again, this isn't that big of a deal because I'm just working with a sample here. But in reality, if I'm ever doing this on my own, I am definitely using pencil. But this way you can see what's happening. Let's see. Okay. That. Let's see if that'll work. Here. Find that. And this is a slight curve this way. Like that. Now this one is pretty much a straight line. Now, here's an interesting thing. So when I look at this seam right here, this line right here, it's wobbly. So if I put it point to point, it's pretty straight, except for right here. Now that could be part of the drape, but I don't think it is. I think it's just how I traced it. Because if I go back to the original markings, they're pretty close together. So here, if I go, oops, something on my mat. If I go straight down, it still clears what I need. And it's straight up and down, which is probably better. Now, this side does have a curve to it, an obvious curve. And, oops, let's flip this and have those meet. This one up here. And I'm going to show you a trick for getting the back correct in just a second, but we need to make sure that we get all of this marked. Okay. And last one for the body. And this one's just sloppy, because I didn't draw that green line worth a hoot. Because this is actually the original line, and I could see it from the tracing. Okay, so that one's better. Cleans that up. Now again, here, I know I need a 90-degree angle right here. So what I'm going to do is from this point over, draw a straight line. That cleans that up. And then over here as well, from that point over, I need a 90-degree angle. Draw a straight line. Okay? Now that cleans up all the lines on the body. Let's focus on the cup. Now here, if I put this across, that's pretty much a straight line. So that's what I'm going to do. Straight line. This is not. Do you see that's a significant curve there? So I'm going to try to find this. See if I can go point to point, cleaning up that curve. Maybe this one. Oh, it's much better. Let's see. Not enough. See this. No. Okay, so I'm going to do some surgery on this. When I trace this, it was really sloppy. So what I'm going to do is just kind of find a smooth curve to about there. Then find a smooth curve. Oh, there we go. Much better. Do the other side. So this has a slight shapy curve to it, over and under. Top, same thing. Find that curve. And remember, we did this to where it looked like it was over, like curving over, but it actually curves in like this. And over here as well. There, and that would be the point that connects to like a strap or something. Straight line and straight line. You wouldn't think it because it goes into a curve, but it does. This right here is the bust point. And this is the bust point too. Okay. Here, gonna get out, and I drew the wrong line there. This, I'm gonna get out my curved ruler. There we go. Draw that one in. Flip it. Draw that. Rotate it. Oh, much better. Draw that. Here, there is a slight curve to that dart. And I'm just going to find that curve. There we go. Okay, so that takes care of cleaning up the lines. That's all I've done. I haven't done any measuring. Now we measure. Let me switch to a different marker color. Yellow, that might look periwinkle. That'll work. I'm so glad I have every color Sharpie in existence. Okay, so with this, I'm going to turn this at a slight angle so it's easier for me. I'm going to measure this line right here, and I'm just measuring it. So this is 8 1/16. And I'm going to record that measurement. Okay. I'm going to measure the seam it sews to exactly. And my measurement is 8 inches. Now, my margin of error for this is about 1/16 of an inch. But I'm using marker. And my marker tells me that this is probably just the width of the marker dealing with this issue, where I have a 1/16 over here and an 1/8 over here, nothing over here and a 1/16 over here. So for this, just for the sake of argument, I'm going to come up. Oh, that's the wrong color. Will that work? Yeah. Well, I'll just do it in black. It's probably easier. I'm going to come up 1/16 of an inch. And when I do that, I'm still going to go over there. And this line, the pink line down there, no longer exists. So now that when I measure this, I'm at 8. And I measure this, I'm at 8. So now that and that match. Now, if, and I might have it later on, if my measurement was more than 1/8 of an inch, I would start to panic a little bit. Meaning A, I didn't trace something correctly, or B, it really just was wrong in the measurements. So let's pretend this was 8 and this was 8 1/4. At that point, because I have this end, this end, this end, and this end, I would split the difference on this. I would take, the difference would be 1/4 of an inch. So that means I would need to add half of the difference to the short side and take away half of the difference to the long side. So if this was 8 1/4, that means I would have to kill a 1/16 up here and a 1/16 down here to form 8 1/8. If this was 8 inches, I'd have to add a 1/16 up here and add a 1/16 down here to get 8 1/8. And then these two seams would be equal. If it's over, if it was just like 1/8 of an inch difference like this was, I would just fix it in the least obvious place. And the least obvious place here is right here. 2 reasons. A, this seam is tiny. And B, we have to adjust to get to a 90-degree angle anyway. So on a seam that's on an edge that's 1 1/8 wide, you might as well just go to the point that you need it to be and then draw it over. No one is going to notice a 1/16 or a 1/16 or 1/8 of an inch down here. Okay? So those two seams, when I'm done marking these things, I check them off. And let's just go to the next one. Measure up there. This is 8 3/8. And always write this stuff down on the pattern. That way you don't get confused later on. This is 8 1/2. So we're dealing with little piddly things. 1/8 of an inch here, 1/8 of an inch there. So let's look at these two edges right here. This edge is smooth across. There's a slight uptick, but that's okay. It's still smooth across. Here, this one comes down. Now, 8 3/8 and 8 1/2. I have a lot of complexity up here because I have to get this curve to match all of this up here. And I would rather not have to deal with more problems at the cup. So the path of least resistance here, again, is the hem. So if I have 8 3/8 and I have 8 1/2, all I have to do is subtract 1/8 of an inch from down here, which would be right here. So now what I'm going to do is find a smooth curve that goes from this side over here to that 1/8 inch spot and call it a day. Then this does not exist. The little hash marks, when you have a line and you put a little hash mark through it like that, that means that line no longer exists. So here, I've just got that straight line now. And when I measure, I'm now at 8 3/8. So that and that match. Now, next one. This seam. Let's see, come on. So let's say this is 9 inches. And this is, oh, perfect, 9 inches. So those two, perfect. Don't have to worry about them. We like those. This is upside down. No. This is 8 and, oh, come on. 8 1/4. And this is 8 1/4. Yay. So that one and that one, done. Last one. 8 1/16. 8 1/4. Wait, 8 1/16. Is that right? Yeah, 8 1/16 and 8. Well, it's really 3/16. So again, so I've got 8 3/16, 8 1/16. Again, we have an issue where we have to come into a 90-degree angle over here, which is going to correct the line anyway. So what I'm going to do is just measure down 8 1/16 and then just correct to the center back. And now these two lines no longer exist. Okay? That corrects all of the seams. Oops, check mark, check mark. That corrects all of the seams going across the body of the corset, or the top, whatever we're going to call it. Now, let's focus up here. Before I do anything to this to make it 3 pieces, let's just keep it together. That way we know what we're doing. I'm going to measure this, 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 and this. This measurement, these 4 things right here, should match in here. But I'm going to make sure to do this section by section. So this piece right here connected to this piece right here fits between here and here. This piece right here connected to this piece right here should match this piece here connected to this piece here. Oops, I forgot a notch. Right there. Yeah. And this seam right here, where it connects to that, should match right there. Let's hold our breath. So I'm going to have to turn this sideways. I can't get to it up there. Okay. So let's focus on, well, maybe not. Let's See if I can get this in frame. Okay, so let's focus on this plus this equals this. So my measurement here is 1 1/4. And this, well, let's see, let's go past 1 1/4. Well, let's do it the right way. And this is 3 1/2. So that would be, sorry, 4 3/4. I couldn't do math. So 4 3/4. So this should equal 4 3/4. Oh boy, we're lucky. This matches exactly 4 3/4. Meaning from here to here plus this equals this arc correctly. So that is done. Now we need to measure this plus this, because these two seams come together to form the second junction. So this is 2 1/2 plus 1 3/4. I cannot do math right now, so let's just do this. It's 2 1/2. Put that at 2 1/2. That's just, so that's 4 1/4 total for this arc. So this plus this should equal 4 1/4. That's 1 1/4. And this is 3. And 1/8. So that's 1 1/4 plus 3 1/8. So that would be 4 3/8. Okay, that's not terrible. So my cup here equals 4 3/8. My cup here equals 4 1/4. I have a difference of 1/8 of an inch. So all I have to do is kill 1/8 of an inch. I have a lot of opportunities to do that. I've got here, 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 and yeah, so I've got those 4 points right there. Now, I could take 1/8 of an inch, divide it by 4, and take away each of those points easily. But what I'm going to do, the path of least resistance here is probably the dart or this seam here. So what I can do is take a 1/16 of an inch off of the dart and take a 1/16 of an inch. I cannot see that, it's too far away. Take a 1/16 of an inch off of and I'm just blending the two here. So now if I measure, this is 1 3/16. So let's put that at 1 3/16. And this total comes out to 1 3/16. Come on. 4 1/4. Now, again, it's really insignificant as far as the number is concerned, but you need to go ahead and correct it. Again, I'm working with a marker, so it could easily have just been marker width. But now that I know those black lines are what they need to be, I don't have to worry about it. So now we have just checked to make sure the body works together and the cup works together, and that the cup will fit into the body. We are done correcting this pattern. Well, we're done correcting the pattern so far. Now let's look at this cup. Theoretically, you could leave the dart in here if you wanted to. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't like doing that because I like to have a seam to function as a what's it called? I like to have the seam function as I like to have this area function as a seam. That way I can put boning or whatever I need to in it should I need to do that. In order to get that to happen, what we need to do is find some kind of happy medium that connects these 2 points. So what I like to do is draw a line that blends into both of these from the bus point-ish. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly on the bus point. If you went an eighth or a quarter around the bus point, you're fine. So here, this would be a better place for it. And what I'm going to do is just blend into this and blend into this. Now, when I cut this, I'm going to smooth it out. Okay? I'm not going to worry about like trying to get that line perfect right now. I'm just going to smooth it out. Because in pattern making, when you deal with a princess line, the princess line starts out like that with a really sharp point. And what do we do in a princess line? We smooth it out. We do lose a little bit of length there, but it's insignificant. So we always blend a smooth curve. We're going to do the exact same thing here when we cut this out. But now we have an indication that says, hey, we need to make a line there. Okay? The next thing we need to double check, and this one's kind of weird because you might forget to do it. This is the one thing that we need to double check. Right here, you need to make sure that this dart in its original position is the same. These 2 dart legs are the same length. Oops. You need to make sure that this leg is 2.5 and this leg is 2.5. So we're okay. Sometimes when you mark this dart, you can mark it incorrectly or pin it incorrectly, and it can get away from you just by like 1/8 of an inch and ruin your day. So correct it same way that we've corrected everything. Correct it if it's not the same length. Okay? Now, there's a couple of things we need to do, and I'm going to sort of like do half of this because I need to show you how to do a lace up back. Okay, I'm going to cut this because I got to show you what to do next. Okay, I'm going to cut out these individual pieces like this so you can see what's happening. I'm also going to fold this because I need the paper for the seam allowance. So I'm going to fold this at the top on the seam allowance so I can connect it to the piece next to it, okay? And then we can adjust darts or notches if we need to, which I need to. You don't need to do the whole seam if you're going to do this. And remember, we're still just making a working pattern, so it's not that big of a deal. Okay. Then here, and this is a curve, so I can only do the top part of it like that. See that? Now, I'm going to get some tape. That way this can it's just temporary tape. It's not that big of a deal. So I'm going to put this, and I'm ignoring the notch for now because I know my measurement is correct. I don't need to adjust it any further. So that matches. And this is called walking a seam. So I know my measurement is correct, so I don't have to worry about it. Here, here. Okay. And all I'm doing is putting these two together. And I'm going to redo the notches in just a second. But this tape, and I'm just matching the top part up here. I don't care about anything else because it's obviously going to be crossing over each other. This isn't fabric. This is paper. So I don't need to worry about grain or any of that stuff, stretching to fit or whatever. What I'm looking for here is the shape of this back seam. And you can see that this curve could be a little bit smoother. So finding, wrong ruler, finding a straightaway into the back from this point here. This is the highest point that connects to the cup. So what I want to do is I want to go from here and make a smooth slope to center back. So with this, all I'm doing is finding a smooth curve that goes from here all the way across to a 90-degree angle back here. And you can see right here, I'm a little over the line. So I'm just going to put this here, make sure I'm at a 90-degree angle back here, and you can check that with a, come on, smooth out. This is what oh, that tape came undone. I was like, what's going on? Well, that'll change everything, won't it? So that's there. And that's there. And let me put some tape down here. That way these puppies don't move. Okay. So I'm going to put this here. Find a smooth slope. Like that. And I'm using this line, which we know is a true line, up to here. And I'm going to... Now, you don't necessarily have to change this. You can leave it the way it is. But what I'm doing is just giving myself a nice, smooth, pure slope to the back. Okay? And that's what I want. Now, this line, that matches there. Okay. Corrects any roughness at the top. And I've just connected the top up here from the seam. So basically what I've done is I just extended the line up into that new mark. Okay? And that gives me a nice, smooth, clean line. Just a second. Let me check this. Okay. So now, here, now I have a corrected line at the top across all of these. Putting this back. What I can do now, see these little notches up here that aren't matching? See my stuff down here that's not matching? Oh, it's not because it's not sewn correctly. But now I can correct notches. Here, I've got it. Make that across. Make that across. this back. That across like that. Okay. And you can continue that for all the other notches. I'm not going to do all the other notches, but all you have to do is fold the paper where they match right there, and then put your notch to match it like that. Make sure to get it. Oh, that one's okay. Tape everywhere. Make sure that you're matching everything that you can possibly match waist-wise. And again, you're working in paper when you do this, and it's not going to like bend and fold and you've got tape everywhere. So give yourself a little leeway. Okay, everything's down here is okay. And then we'll just assume the rest are fine. I'm not going to worry about it. You can do that at your own leisure. But it's basically just making sure all your notches are where you left them. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of some excess paper. Cycle that. Okay. I'm just cleaning this up so we have better pieces to work with. And again, we talked about like the placement of notches when we did the drape, so you can change all of these as you need to. Okay. So here's my pieces back to some semblance of normal. Now, at this point, we could take this and put seam allowance on it and turn it into a muslin, and that's fine. Which is what we're going to do eventually, but I'm not going to go any further than the pattern stage for this project, because at that point, I mean, maybe later on I'll do another video like that, but my school class, that we've already covered that. But this, at this point, I would put seam allowance on it, test it, put it back on the mannequin, pinch out what you don't need if you have any excess or anything like that, and kind of go from there. But the whole point of this was to kind of show you how to do bra cups and how to do a lace-up back. A lace-up back is pretty easy because you literally just come in from center back. How much do you come in is up to you. When I do this, I like to do 1 inch back from center back. You can do more depending on how much lace-up you want. If you wanted a very wide section in the back, you could literally eliminate the entire center back seam. And if you were going to do that, and here's this back seam, what I would do is just straighten this out completely. This would be a straight line perpendicular to the waist. Even if you add a little bit more to the down here, you want a straight line perpendicular to the waist, and that would be not your new center back seam, but that would be where you'd insert the grommets or the loops or whatever you're going to do to have this thing lace up in the back. I think that's excessive. I don't really like super wide backs. They always make it look like the corset just doesn't fit. I like just a simple 1 inch back off from center back, but it's up to you. I have in the past done strapless bodices that literally were just grommets from the side seam back, and the whole back was lace up. So you can do whatever you want, but this is how to do a simple back off for a lace up back. Now, remember I told you when we did this, I draped all the way to center back, because as it is now, you have, we'll assume we've already checked this and it's perfect. As it is now, we have a corset or a bustier top that you can put a zipper up center back. So if you wanted to make this properly, at this point, I would take another piece of paper, put it on top of this, And well, actually, let's just go ahead and do that then. So I can show you what's happening with it. This isn't pattern making paper per se, but it'll work. Okay. So what I'm going to do is take a piece of paper, and you can see that through it. I'm going to trace off this pattern piece. Use your rulers. I'm just brushing through this. This is center back. It goes up. This is the waist. Those are my 3 notches. Okay. So now I have an identical copy to the original. The original, I'm going to leave it alone. This one, we're going to turn into a lace-up back. So here, straight line down from center back, draw a straight line. That's literally all you do. The key to this is the seam allowance, which we'll get to in just a second. So now I have 2 designs. One that is like I'd put a zipper in or hooks and eyes or something, and one that I would have a lace up back. Also, okay, so kind of backtrack a little bit here because I kind of ran over this. When you do this, when you start to correct things, you need to make sure that your waist is pretty much where you left it to, so that when you take a piece that goes over here, that when you match that waist up to there, you don't have a significant difference. Again, in draping, I say your margin of error is about a 1/16 of an inch. Up or down is fine. So if like you put this together and it like matched right above that line, it's okay. I wouldn't cry about it. You can get perfect if you need to, but it's not that big of a deal. It's like we're talking like a 1/16 of an inch, which is just pencil width to one side or the other. So that's another thing you can use to check up and make sure that when you mark it next to something, it matches exactly. Okay. So don't forget that your waist is there for a reason, not just a grain line. Okay, so which is what we're going to do next. Grain lines for this. There's an orange. For center front is going to match, be parallel to center front. Everything else is going to be perpendicular to the waist. Of course, this is like a traditional grain line. If you want to do something funky, do something funky. The only thing I would suggest is that you stay away from true bias because you haven't draped this thing on the bias. Okay. And we got that. Grain line for the cups. Typically, I like to have the cups going another direction, but that's me, so it's up to you. In this case, I'm just going to have them go parallel to the side of the cup. So you get, like, I always think like if you're work in stripes and you get kind of like funky stripe effects. And here, I'm just going to have it go parallel to the upper seam, cutting through both of those. Okay. Almost done. So I'm not going to add seam allowance to everything, but let's just talk about this for a second. You can do seam allowance however you want to do seam allowance. It's completely up to you. Whatever seam allowance you normally use. I'm just going to, what I normally do for my corsets and bustiers or whatever you want to call them, is I have seam allowance running through the body. And I have, I don't put seam allowance at the bottom, at the hem, and I don't put seam allowance at the neckline because I like to bind those edges. So let me show you how to do both if you want. If you plan on doing this where it's just a simple bustier with casings, you will put seam allowance at 1/4 of an inch. So 1/4 inch is for casings. 1/4 inch seam allowance on all major seams is for casings. If you are doing normal construction where this will be lined, then you will do it at regular seam construction, which for me is 3/8, but for school is probably 1/2 inch. So I'll say 3/8 to 1/2 inch, and that is for lined construction. Okay? If you want to do felded seams that give you a felded casing, then you are going to do that at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. 5/8 felling. Okay. Later on in life, I will do another video where I cover what you do for all 3 of these. Okay. I'll show you how they go together later on. I'm probably not till the end of the semester though. So that's 3 potential seam allowances that you can deal with. Let's just go for this one. I'll do the felling just because that's typically what I like to do. So 5/8 of an inch away from the seam allowance, the sewn edge. I don't do anything at the hem. I leave it raw because I like to bind that edge. And this edge, which would be the sewn edge, is the finished edge. And I'll do a video where I show you how to do that one day. It's not enough hours in the day. Just go into full-time video production. Okay, for the cup seam, because this is not, I do this different. I do a binding here. The cup seam here, I do not do a felded seam. It's just too difficult. It's not too difficult. It's just a pain. You can do a felled seam if you want. It's up to you, and you would still use 5/8 of an inch. I like to put a binding on the bottom here and then fill it with a little technique I use for underwire, which again, I'll do a video one day. So the cup seam here just gets regular construction seam allowance. So in that case, for me, it's 3/8 of an inch. And please take your time with this. I'm just rushing. I gotta be somewhere soon. Okay. And then here, because this little nubbin right here gets bound, there is no seam allowance on it. So down here, this does not get bound. I mean, this does not get sewn to anything, and it gets bound. So right across, regular, flat, no seam allowance down there. Okay. And I'll just do one more piece, and then we'll talk about this cup, and we'll call it a day. So this is the cup part here. Goes into that. I just turn it upside down because I draw to the left. I'm felling these seams. Sometimes I say felding for some reason. Okay, like that. Then there is no seam allowance at the bottom because that's going to get bound. So that's what those pieces would look on. And you would just go so on and so forth, paying attention to what happens to what seam. Now, the upper cup up here does not get seam allowance because this is bound. So raw edge here, and then I'm putting a binding on top of that with an inset miter here. Well, not an inset miter, just a top miter. This is getting cut up. And then we'll talk about seam allowance at center back. When I cut this, I'm cutting on my corrected line, and watch. As I cut this, there's the line. As I cut this, I'm just smoothing out to that point. Nice, smooth curve. Same thing over here. That point, smooth curve. This little space in here is negligible. Now I would, because I'm lazy, I would tape this to another piece of paper and add my generic seam allowance on here all the way around, because that is going to sew to the other part of the cup and that seam at the top. Or whatever. If you wanted to use the 1/4 inch here because you wanted to put a casing on top of it, that's what you would do. Okay? And same thing to the other piece. Last thing. If you have the regular back, you will add, depending on what you're doing to it, I still like to add 1 inch seam allowance. 1 inch seam allowance to center back. The bottom gets bound, the top edge gets bound, and over here, this side gets the felding. I always say felding, one or the other. Straight across. Okay. So this is with zipper. If you are doing the lace-up back, top, still bound, so no seam allowance. Over here, this seam sews to the other side, so this gets the felling seam allowance, which is 5/8. Then this is my new cutoff point. So really, the rest of this doesn't exist. So that would be the actual shape of the piece. So we're going to ignore this. Center back no longer exists. Okay. So from our new line here, we're going to add 2 inches of seam allowance. Why 2 inches? Let me cut this apart and show you. Two inches, when we fold this back on itself, allows us to do 2 things. put a channel of boning right there. Allows us to put grommets or eyelets or whatever we're using right there. Then allows us to put a second channel of boning next to that, because you want to reinforce those eyelets. And that stitching is right here. And it still gives us a little bit of room on this side to where we can put a lining. Let me make some lining real quick. So that we can fold a lining and sew it by hand next to that row of stitching. Okay. So that's why we give ourselves 2 inches back here. Okay. That's it. That is how you do a basic pattern for a basic cup bustier corsety thing. That's how you do a lace up back. That's how you treat a lace up back. And I suppose later on in life, if I get a chance, I will do some construction videos on how to put this together. But, you know, this really is for more school pattern making work. So best of luck doing this if you want to. If you have any questions, you can put them in the comment section of this video, or if you're in my class, you can ask me online somehow, email, Canvas, whatever you want. All right. I will see, if you're in my class, I will see you tonight. If you're not in my class, have a wonderful day. Well, if you're in my class, do have a wonderful day anyway. I'll see you all later. Bye.